It is a deadly daily drama as scores of ships cross the Mediterranean with desperate asylum seekers. Joining us now, someone who has witnessed the crisis firsthand. Stephen Cornish, Executive Director of Médecins Sans Frontières Canada, Doctors Without Borders, as we say in English, and it's good to have you back here in our studio. I want to start by sharing with our viewers a clip that you guys put up on YouTube back in May of this year, which sets the scene well. Okay. Let's roll the tape, please.
The ship contains about 460 people. It's very crowded. About 300 of us we have in the bottom and around the engine. So the engine is not working well. It's not able to cross the Mediterranean Sea by this boat. So the MSF members save our life.
C'était très émotif. Les femmes qui sont arrivées, moi-même j'ai pleuré. Voilà, ils sont dans un bateau pourri, 50 personnes ensemble. Le fait que nous on va faire ça, voilà, ça montre qu'il y a un grand problème à la frontière de l'Europe.
Now that's as of May. We know things have gotten way worse since then. So tell us how the crisis has evolved for MSF since that was uploaded.
Well, since then we've actually had to increase the number of ships we have on the Mediterranean. We now have 3 search and rescue ships. We've rescued over 15,000 people this season alone. And unfortunately, we're continuing to see not enough assets on the sea. Just this week already 72 people have perished since the weekend. And the numbers just keep coming. And of course, now we've seen the crisis move from one that was only on the sea to one that's also on land. It's been across our TV screens these last days. And so we've had opened teams that are all across the land crossings in Europe to bring basic needs, medical care, food and shelter to people that are now struggling a second time, facing, after their first perilous journey across the sea, now facing a perilous journey just to get to safety inside Europe.
And can I understand, you obviously are on the sea, as that footage just indicated, but are you on land as well, trying to assist?
Absolutely. We're not only at the entrance points in Greece and Italy, but we're all across what we're seeing in the news. So we're in Hungary, we're in Serbia, we're in Kosovo. We're also helping when the refugees are finally getting to the countries that they're looking to get to in Belgium and France all along. And it's really a tragedy that it's taking international organizations to do this work rather than the member states themselves, who are fully capable of being able to receive people in a dignified manner, to meet their basic needs, and to ensure that they can be safe, secure, and have their asylum processes done in a dignified manner, rather than the way that we're seeing it.
Let me pick up on that first answer, because I think you said there were 15,000 lives that your organization had directly saved. Once you save those people from the precarious nature of their journey, what happens to them?
Well, what happens is there's a central office that's coordinating where the ship should unload. And so we're coordinated by this office. We bring the people that we save into Italy, where they're processed, they're given food, water, shelter. They get reviewed also medically speaking. And then there's their processes are adjudicated in some sense. And what we're finding is about 60% of those that are arriving in Italy are ending up being granted a refugee status. And the other 40% fall into more the economic migrant category. And those people are either sent back to the countries that they came from, or in some cases, they're able to integrate across borders and to continue their journey.
So if they are sent back, how that 40% you just referred to, who sends them back and how?
Well, that's the member state countries themselves that would send them back to the countries of origin. 40% of the claims aren't given refugee status, but it doesn't mean that all those 40% are actually sent back, because many people have just continued on their journey.
And they try again somewhere else.
They try again somewhere else, or they just continue, because one of the things now is you have Italy and Greece as the entry points that are basically being forced to care for all of the people coming into Europe. It's a shared responsibility on the part of Europeans, but those two countries are now not processing everyone that comes in because they don't want them to be sent back to their initial point of entry, which would be Greece or Italy, forcing them to absorb all of the asylum capacity.
And of the 60% who are approved and who do get through, are you able to stay in touch with them at that point, or what happens to them?
We don't follow them on a daily basis, but we have come back into contact with a number of these people at the centers where we're helping them across Europe. And that's really the tragedy, because they're being forced to remain in a precarious condition once they're already on European soil. And they're doing
living?
long, arduous walks. We're seeing many now dehydrated, many injuries that are infested because people are going across barbed wire fences and continuing the journey. We're really seeing their health situation deteriorate as they're being forced to walk when they should just be able to be put on buses and brought to their final destination in a dignified manner.
Stephen, here's what the Guardian newspaper, I guess this is a few weeks ago, had to say about all of this. Throughout Europe, leaders are succumbing to the keep them out syndrome. Hungary is building a fence along its border with Serbia. Spain has done the same thing. Bulgaria followed suit. More fencing is springing up in Calais. Will this work? Unlikely. When you flee atrocities and war, the desperation to reach a haven will always be stronger than security fences and dogs. The article did point out that both Germany and Sweden, even as far back as August, were showing more generosity towards the refugees, and we talked about that on this program last night. But tell me what you see firsthand as the consequences of building up those fences.
Well, we've been working in migration projects for many years, and the higher the fence, the more difficult the journey that we try to make to keep people out. It forces people into the hands of smugglers. It forces people to take ever more precarious routes. It's why we have people risking everything to get across the Mediterranean, even though they know the risks. And we don't concentrate, I think, enough on the people and their individual stories of suffering, things that would drive them to make such a perilous journey from the conflict that we know in Syria or in Eritrea or in Somalia. These people have no ability to go back home. Many of them are being kept in refugee camps in substandard conditions with no hope and no future. And so they do what any of us would do, is try to seek a better life for their families.
We know Syria is, of course, the #1 exit point in the world right now for refugees. But the clip that we showed off the top of our conversation here was not Syria. That was Eritrea. Right? So there is there's more diversity to the picture than perhaps what we're seeing on our television screens over the last few months. Fair to say?
Absolutely.
Can you give us a sense about how widespread the refugee flight situation is right now?
Well, I think it is the majority of those that we're seeing still. And what we know is that only about 1% of refugees from camps are being able to be resettled in the West and elsewhere. And as a result, that's one of the big push factors that's pushing them onward. We're keeping, in some cases in South Sudan and some of the neighboring countries of Syria, the conditions in the camps and security are not even maintained, and people are living in very arduous, difficult conditions with no hope in sight. And that's what's forcing them to flee in these cases.
Now, the geography of the situation is obvious. It means that when people are leaving Syria, the first spot they want to go is Turkey or Greece or Italy or wherever. We're a long way physically from all of this. So for those who want to help, how do they help?
Well, I think the first thing is we have to recognize that this isn't just a European issue. On your show, they also mentioned how there were over 60 million displaced and refugees at this very moment, the most since the Second World War. And we have to, first step is realize it's a global crisis, and we have a global responsibility. Once we do that, I think that's the first step. The second step then is understanding that we have to assist people to get to our shores. It's not just thanks to our geographical location that we don't have to worry about these things. And then the next thing is we know that being able to come to Canada is a very long, arduous process in itself. Mm-hmm. We have to cut out some of the red tape. We have to speed up processing times and ensure that those that are seeking asylum have the ability also to reach our shores.
This is an election season in Canada. Does that make it harder or easier for those things to happen?
I'm really not terribly able to say whether that makes it easier or harder for those things to happen. I think what we've seen in Germany is the German population themselves opening their hearts. After this tragic image that we all saw that shocked the world of the young boy drowning in the Mediterranean, there was a real shift in public attitude from one of looking at the other of somehow undeserving to more looking at ourselves and opening up our hearts and our empathy. And that shifted public opinion and policy in Germany, which is now opening its arms to an incredible degree. We have a football club in Germany offering $1 million to help resettlement, when just this last week in Toronto, we had a sign at Toronto FC saying, "Refugees welcome," taken down in the stands because it was too political. So there's something really powerful about the power of people, and I think the empathy of Canadians when we see how many people have opened their hearts and their homes now, contacting Lifeline Syria, trying to form neighborhood groups to bring in refugees. I think this has really touched the hearts of Canadians. I think we're a very empathetic people on an ongoing basis, and I think it will be important that whoever wins the election in October has an ear to the voice of so many empathetic people wanting to be part of the solution, not just the problem.
Having said that, let me ask an uncomfortable question here, which is, I believe Slovakian officials have said that they only want Christian refugees coming into their country, not Muslims from Afghanistan or Syria. And their explanation is, we're not racist, we just think it will be easier for Christian refugees to adapt to and integrate into Slovakian society more easily than Muslims could. In your view, is that a fair request for countries to make?
Well, in my view, is kind of not even the point, because the view here is actually people's right when they're seeking asylum. And those who need assistance, those who fear for their lives, need to be assisted in a neutral and impartial manner by all those countries that have signed up to the UNHCR refugee conventions. And so putting in unhelpful measures to decide which people have a right or not to seek asylum, I think is contrary to those conventions and is contrary to the empathy that we need to have in this situation.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. These countries may very well say, it's all well and good for you to say that, but the reality is these people will be difficult to integrate into our broader society. They will be living in substandard conditions. They will become angry and radicalized because we don't have enough jobs for them. And at the end of the day, it's going to be a bigger problem for everybody. How do you address that issue?
Well, I couldn't address it as a humanitarian because it's above my pay grade, but as an individual, I would say those very same words that you just spoke could also be said for leaving those people in substandard refugee camps, under-assisted, with no one to care, no one to protect them. And how are they not going to be facing the same potential radicalization if they're not being assisted and not being given a helping hand? We've come through a period over the last 5 to 7 years in Europe, in Australia, in North America, where given economic situations and other impetuses, we've cast the other as somehow undeserving. And I think that's one of the things that this image of the little boy helped us overcome. And whether we call someone a migrant or a refugee or an asylum seeker, I think we have to look beyond that to the people and their families and what kind of story would force them to take such risk. And when we're on the boats in the Mediterranean, I mean, would we be asking people in the water which one we should extend a hand and a life jacket to, a migrant or a refugee? I think not. On a bigger scale, on a macroeconomic scale, you can of course set your migration policy, but you can't set your asylum and your refugee acceptance policy. And I think that's where the two things would separate on a policy front. But as far as being deserving of assistance, of security, and of the basic building blocks for life, we have to offer that to all people and then let the asylum processes take their due course.
How do we make that initial trip, that boat ride, whatever, how do we make that less deadly and less perilous?
Well, I think the first thing there is that we have to start to open up the channels again that allow people to seek asylum. And that's something that's not been going on for several years. States have put in place more and more interdiction measures to stop people from being able to flee.
So they go to the human smugglers and so on.
So we force them into ever more dangerous routes where they take more risk and where they have to go underground and where it makes this whole thing much worse. So what we need to do is to have safe and legal channels for asylum seekers and for migrants to be able to exercise their rights. Once we process the cases, then each state and each government can adjudicate on their cases.
Let me get you finally just to react to something that one of your people in the field wrote recently. This is Simon Bryant, who is an MSF Canada Volunteer, he's on the Phoenix in the Mediterranean. He's on a boat. You know where he is actually right now? He's somewhere out there.
He's somewhere out there. We were hoping for him to join us today, but he is on standby for the next rescue at this point.
Well, here's what he had to say on his blog post just a few weeks ago, not even a few weeks ago. One day, 2 wooden boats, 1 rubber dinghy, 1 helivac, over 1,000 people rescued by 3 ships, and 52 perfectly senseless deaths. The teamwork and effort involved were most impressive, but search and rescue isn't any solution to this absurd and appalling Mediterranean mess. A journalist later asked me about the nationality of the deceased, noting that sub-Saharan Africans tend to end up below deck on these boats. I felt a flash of quiet rage at the question and the injustice. They were all simply people, I managed to reply, whose nationality was of no consequence. You folks, when you're out there, see a lot of awful stuff, right? You see a lot of human misery at its worst. How do you deal with all of that?
Well, I think the answer to that is that there are 2 things. The first is that when you're in the situation itself, you're able to bring a small amount of assistance, a modicum of humanity and dignity to where there isn't any, and that buttresses you and allows you to truly live your own humanitarian journey. Processing all of that after can be difficult. And I think one of the ways that both Simon and I personally deal with that is by being able to advocate, to tell the stories of those people, and to put policymakers, populations, and others in front of their responsibilities. And your show, in that sense, helps me on an individual level do that. And I think Simon's blog helps him do that, because then we can do our own small part in pushing the policy wheel forward and hopefully making a better, more just, more humane, and more dignified response. At this stage, it's absolutely unfathomable, not just that he's recounting this story from that boat, but that we're watching these scenes in Europe unfold. We absolutely have to come up with a better policy answer.
Good luck with your work. Thanks for coming into TVO tonight to tell us about it.
Thank you so much for having us.
Stephen Cornish, Executive Director, MSF Canada.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.